Olá pessoal, sejam bem-vindos mais uma vez ao meu canal Investigação OVNI Apresenta. E hoje temos uma presença ilustre de um grande amigo, editor do meu livro UFO Contacts em Brasil. Também ele é o dono da Flying Disc Press, que publica maravilhosos livros sobre ufologia em inglês e também depois em português, depois em francês, e depois em espanhol, alemão e tudo mais. O meu convidado de hoje é o ufólogo inglês Mantle. Ele é ufólogo desde 1979, quando se juntou ao British UFO Research Association, BUFORA, e a Yorkshire UFO Society, UFOs. Foi diretor nacional da MUFON na Inglaterra, teve participação em centenas de programas de rádio e TV de todo o mundo, inclusive esteve aqui em Brasil em 1997, no Fórum Mundial de Ufologia em Brasília. Autor e coautor dos livros UFOs na Rússia e OSNIs, Segredos Russos, ambos publicados pela Biblioteca UFO, Introduction UFOs, A Young Person's Guide, Russia's Roswell Incident, and Other Amazing UFO Cases from the Former Soviet Union, Roswell Alien Autopsy, The Truth Behind the Film That Shocked the World, e chocou mesmo, Without Consent, Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind in the UK, and a novela que ele escreveu, a novela que eu digo é uma ficção, Once Upon a Missing Time. Então trago para vocês agora o meu querido amigo Mantle. Hi Phil. Well,
good afternoon, Thiago.
I speak only good stuff about you in Portuguese, so you don't have to worry about it.
I'm sure you did. I'm sure you did.
My friend, thank you very much to be in my YouTube channel. It's a very honor and a pleasure to have you here, and let the Brazilian audience know a little more about you, about your work, about the Flying Disc Press, which is very important for me because it gave me the opportunity to write in English and publish my first book in English. Thank you very much.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine, I can assure you.
Well, my friend, let's start in the beginning. And is the same questions I always ask to my guests. When did your interest in ufology start?
Yeah, good question, Thiago. I mean, when I think back, I always had an interest in all things paranormal, as far back as I can remember. But coming up through my teenage years in high school was when I really started to get interested in things. For example, where I used to live, literally the opposite side of the road was my best friend's grandmother, and she used to go to the spiritualist church. So on occasion, I went with her. I found it fascinating. You know, didn't necessarily agree with everything, but, you know, it was a great way of finding things out. Because I left high school in 1974, so it's a long time before the internet and, you know, that kind of thing. So there wasn't, if you wanted to find things out, you either went to the library, which wasn't much help, or you went and visited people or places. So that's what I did. Now, around about that time, I was also interested in astronomy. The space race, of course, was still going strong. And I read one book on astronomy that had one chapter in it on UFOs, basically dismissing them, really. But nonetheless, it kind of piqued my interest. So in 1974, I left school, not really knowing what to do with myself. So I went from one job to another, but I started to read about UFOs. Then, of course, in 1978, the Spielberg movie Close Encounters came out here in the UK. And I went to watch that. And then in late 1978, early into 1979, I went to work in West Germany, as it was then. I didn't speak the language, and I was only there for about 4 months. So I asked my mother if she could send me some books to read, because we couldn't find any English books at all. She sent me a box of books, and they were all on UFOs. I have no idea to this day, Thiago, where she got them from, but nonetheless, that was really piqued my interest. So when I came home, my aunt, who lived just around the corner from us, I used to live about 5 miles from a city called Leeds, well-known football team, Leeds United, of course, and they published every night, and still do now, an evening newspaper called the Yorkshire Post. Yorkshire is the county in which I live. And my auntie brought me the evening newspaper, and in it was a little small advertisement for the formation of the Yorkshire UFO Society, and it was coming up that Sunday in Leeds. So I had no idea where this place was. I didn't drive at that point, so I got on the bus. And I don't know if you can remember from when you lived in England, but on a Sunday, everything used to close. So I gets on the bus and goes into Leeds, and it's like a ghost town, you know. So you couldn't really ask anybody where this place was. But anyway, I managed to find it. And there was about 20, 30 people there. And the Yorkshire UFO Society was started by two brothers, Graham and Mark Birdsall. Many years later, of course, Graham went on to publish and edit UFO magazine. And Graham and Mark put on a presentation that day, Thiago, and I just felt like I was at home. It was great. They also had some books to read, some more books I could buy. And that was it. That was me hooked. And so I joined the Yorkshire UFO Society there and then, and I was up and running. That's how it all began for me.
Well, it's amazing. It starts just with Graham. Graham was, I never met him face to face, but in the early of 90s, we exchanged some emails. Well, he was amazing. He was amazing. He was a great guy. Well, in 1997, you released or helped to release a video that shocked the world. The autopsy of an alien from the Roswell crash. Years later, the video was considered a fraud. Today, what do you have to say about this video?
Yeah, first of all, you got the date wrong. It was 1995 it came out.
1995.
Yeah, but today it's still the same, Thiago. I mean, I was first contacted by the promoter of the alien autopsy video, a chap called Ray Santilli, as far back as 1993. At that point, I was the press officer for the British UFO Research Association. I did other things as well. That was just one of the jobs. And a letter appeared on my desk from a company in London called the Merlin Group, wanting to see if we could help them make a documentary. So we exchanged a few ideas. Then I spoke with Santilli, and out of the blue, Thiago, he said, "Oh, by the way, you know, I've actually got some footage of the aliens crashed at Roswell." And so I said, "Well, show me." A simple thing. You claim to have these. So the conversation went yes, no, yes, no. I met Santilli in London one evening when we were putting on a presentation for Travis Walton and Mike Rogers. The movie Fire in the Sky had just come out, and Ray Santilli's offices were nearby, so I invited him over. He told me this fantastic story about his business that he was in. You know, he bought and sold music, licensed it, and he said he'd been in Cleveland, Ohio, looking for old film clips of Elvis and what have you, and he bought some. But then this elderly gentleman had come forward and said, "Well, I used to be a military cameraman, and I have film footage of Roswell." And he agreed to buy it, no questions asked, so long as he didn't release his name. So, you know, as you know, the film came out in 1995. It went around the world, and it was probably one of the biggest stories in UFO history, simply by the amount of coverage it got. And I was accused at the time because, I'll give you an example. My wife and I got a young family, and we were building a large extension on our house. And someone said, "Well, where does Philip Mantle get the money from? You know, I worked in a factory. Thiago. They said, well, he doesn't have that kind of money. Well, they were right, I didn't, but my wife did. They never thought to ask that. Before I met my wife, she'd had her own property, which we had now sold, and we used some of that money to build the extension. But it was kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say, you know, Santilli must be paying him. So I was accused of being on the take. I was accused of being Santilli's accomplice, you know, all this kind of thing. So I decided then and then that no matter how long it took, I would get to the bottom of this. Now, one of the reasons I asked Santilli to show it at our conference, which was the first time anybody saw it in public, was it was August 1995. I thought, once this film is out in the public domain, Thiago, then we'll find out. People will come forward and say, that's me, I'm one of the actors, or my grandfather told me about this film and he was, you know, but nothing. I mean, not a thing. It was silence. So we went with what we did have, which was the film only. So we checked all the artifacts in the film. They're all circa 1947. We asked a whole range of medical professionals what they thought about the medical procedure. A lot of them were quite impressed, Thiago. Everybody in the special effects world said they could make it, but none of them knew who had, of course. So, you know, it was kind of in limbo. A lot of people accusing it of being a fake, but nobody able to prove it was a fake. So slowly but surely, I chipped away. Ended up, it's a long story. I've got a huge, great book about it, but when we come through to 2006, I'd already been given the name of the guy who made the dummies, a chap called John Humphreys. The reason we couldn't find him in the special effects world is because he was a sculptor, not a special effects artist. And sometimes he'd worked in film and television. So I'm phoning up, you know, special effects guys, and they said, oh, it looks like Fred. So I'd ring Fred and he said, no, it's not me, it looks like Brian. And I would ring Brian and he said, it's not me, it looks like George. And it just got us nowhere, you know. So during our chats with John Humphreys, he said to a TV producer, it's not me you want, it's Spiros. That's a strange name, but it didn't mean anything to any of us. And that was it. He wouldn't say any more. So in 2006, I was working with a chap by the name of Russell Callahan. Russell used to work on UFO magazine with Graham. He was Graham's son-in-law. He was now running his own magazine called UFO Data. Out of the blue, Russell had a phone call from a man saying, I'm the guy that made the alien autopsy film. So he says, well, it's not me you need to speak to, it's Philip. So he gave me his telephone number. I rang him. Hello, who's that? This is Spiros Malaris. This is Spiros. And as I'm talking to him for the first time, Thiago, all those empty spaces on the jigsaw puzzle were now being filled in one by one. Simple as that. So I recorded the interview and then listened to it back, took some notes, phoned him back. You know, he answered all my questions. And then later I travelled to his home in the outskirts of London, you know, the commuter belt he lived in. I met his partner and her daughter. He lived in a big house with a swimming pool and a Bentley in the drive. You know, he wasn't skint, and he showed me everything. He even had his diaries from the time with notes in, you know, meeting today with Ray Santilli, blah blah blah. He's a pretty good artist in his own right, so he painted a whole storyboard for the alien autopsy film. So it wasn't just notes on a pad; he painted it all. He's a magician by profession and a businessman. He's run his own film crews. He had some of his own paintings on the wall. He had boxes and boxes of material. He had all the original faxes that he got from Kodak telling him what edge codes should be on the side of the film for 1947. He even had a big folder all full of photographs of US military vehicles. And I'm saying, well, what's this for? Because there's no military vehicles seen in it. He says, no, we were actually going to do a film to add on to it, or the flying saucer crashed. And he said, I was going to build a two-dimensional back end of a US military vehicle, but it would look like a 3D, a real one. And he even showed me the one he was going to replicate because you could see its registration plate, his license plate. And so I was going to put that license plate on it. So if you went and checked in the archives in America, you would find out that that was a real American truck. It's not one that's made up. And he said, we're going to have my brother standing there in uniform, but with his face made up as President Truman. So you could see his lips move, and we were going to tell him what to say. And in the distance would be a crashed saucer impacted into the desert. And he said, but we run out of time and money. But that's why he had all this stuff. He even had tape recorded telephone conversations with others involved, admitting it was a fake and so on. So not only could Spiros tell me the story, he could prove what he was saying as well. He could support it. And that's it. You know, there's a lot happened in between there. So I put the book out, you know, and it's all there. And I've revised it because last year was 25 years, you know. So like I said, when we originally started, it was all in paper. So I got stuff out of my files, and I could be writing about something, and I could show you the facts that I got from Ray and Santilli, or the letter I had from somebody else, or a transcript, rather than just summarize it. Well, I'll summarize it here, but if you want, here's the whole transcript. You can read it word for word. So packed all that in a book. And Spiros has been attempting to write his own book for a number of years. He finally got it finished at last year. Then COVID came along, so he had to suspend it. And then it was ready to go for Christmas, and we got shut down again. So the book is literally sat there waiting to be printed at the printers, but it's closed. So we'll have to wait until the lockdown goes, and we'll find. I've seen some of the book. It's not a story. I've written the foreword for it, and you know, and then we'll take it from there. But there is no denying it. You know, it is all a fake. But I think what's important about it, Thiago, is that it's very easy to call things a fake. This was a huge story, and because it was so personal, I was going to make sure that I was going to find out. So the likes of Philip Klass and those that just dismissed it as a fake, none of them could prove it. But it was me, a UFO researcher, who stuck at it and finally got to the bottom of it. And that you can use the same approach with any case. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to turn out to be a fake. You know, you have a case from, say, I don't know, 1980 that you now start looking into, and you dig into it, and you just follow where the information leads you, and at the end of your day you say, well, this is what I've found, which is exactly the approach I took with the alien autopsy film. I'll just keep going until I find out the answers. I just didn't think it would take so long. But there you go. But having said that, look at the people that have been investigating Roswell for a lot longer than that, you know, and they still can't prove it one way or another. But that's another argument, you know.
Yeah, you're correct. And when someone says that it's a fake, and you cannot prove it's a fake, it's just opinion.
Yeah,
just opinion. Well, in my opinion, it's a fake. Okay, but you can prove it's a fake? No. And you dig, and you got it. It's amazing. And I remember when we saw it in Brazil, was on air on a TV show called Fantastic. And I was amazing with that. Whoa, finally we got it. Because everybody believed that. the films, or the films of 1947, the clothes, the things you used to cut the alien was from 1947, so it was perfect. It was perfect.
Yeah. And what to remember as well, Thiago, this was also at the height of the X-Files TV programs. They were, you know, flying high in the rating. So it came out at the right time. And Ray Santilli also had some luck, because one of the arguments against it, for example, was you could never get secret material out of anywhere. Top secret material, top secret film. Here in the UK, this was still a time when we used videotapes. And a gentleman went on what we call a car boot sale one weekend. And he bought some old videotapes that was supposedly blank. And he paid pennies for them, Thiago. And he was going to use them on his recorder at home. So he put them in just to check, started playing it. Turned out they were top secret Special Air Services training videos. SAS, you know, world-renowned military, and they were found on a car boot sale. Then, of course, when you look at the alien autopsy film, apart from it going out of focus now and again, it's in very good condition. So the argument was, well, it wouldn't look like that. It would have holes in it and all this lot. And again, just by chance, someone found a piece of film of Winston Churchill visiting the United States during the Second World War. And I believe he was up atop of the Empire State Building. And it looked as if it had just been filmed yesterday. It had never been shown anywhere. And it looked perfect, Thiago. So all these little things seemed to fall into place, and it was just sheer luck. For example, Santilli also said, you have the film's in a metal canister. The metal canister is inside a box. The box is sealed by a label. And he released photocopies of the boxes with the labels on. And there's a military stamp on these labels. Somebody said, got him, it's a fake. The seal on it was from the US Department of Defense. And it said on there, July 1947. They said the Department of Defense didn't start until September 1947. Therefore, the problem was the writing around the edge of the stamp was blurred. The only difference between the Department of Defense and the Department of War was they changed their names. So the insignia was still the same. But you couldn't read the writing around the edge, so it could have been either of them. So again, you know, another thing that you thought, oh, well, that's proved it fake, that fell by the wayside. And when you meet Spiros, he's got a wicked sense of humour. So this was right up his street. But I've seen some of his magic tricks, and he has attention for detail is one of his specialities. He even got someone's mother, I believe, to write the labels out, because they still wrote the old-fashioned way. They were used to writing with pen and ink, whereas today, can you remember the last time you wrote a letter with a pen? No, can't do it. So even when you watch the alien autopsy film, on the wall on the left, down at the bottom, you even see an electrical socket, and it's an American electrical socket, because they are different to what we use here in the UK. There's nothing plugged into it. It doesn't work. There's no wiring out the back, but he's put it in there just in case somebody saw it. You know, the telephone that's on the wall, somebody said, it's got a curly flex. They didn't have curly flexes in 1947. Well, yes, they did. You just had to pay a little extra money for them. Yeah. and Spiros knew that. So these little things were all built into it. And of course, there are some people who still believe that the film is authentic, Thiago. And no matter what you say or do, it's like some people still believe the Earth is flat, and no matter what you say to them, will not make any difference, you know. But it's a fascinating story, whichever way you want to look at it. It really is. And some people said, well, you know, did it cast ufology in a bad light? I said no, because what we did was to expose it to the media, expose it to the public, and it was a ufologist, me and a few colleagues, that finally got to the end of it. No one else. But it was a huge story. What was you supposed to do? Was I supposed to walk away and ignore it? Had I done that, somebody else would have picked it up and run with it. So, yeah, a great story. It's one I'm trying to get away from, but it will haunt me for the rest of my life, Thiago. But
and
that's the way
it will.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know that. What's amazing is I think it's an example of how to research ufology.
Yeah.
You got something, and you dig until find the answer, the truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even some people don't believe it. Well, but it's okay. It's amazing. My friend, next question. You were one of the first UFO researchers in the world to bring UFO cases from the former Soviet Union to the West. How did you get this?
Yeah, good. Again, another story here for you, Thiago. Back in 1987, the official Soviet news agency was called TASS, TASS. And they sent a press release out saying that a UFO had landed in Voronezh in Russia, and that these strange tall creatures had been seen, and it left deposits on the ground after it had departed. And the Western media got in touch with TASS, and they said, you know, is this a joke? And TASS said, in a typical Soviet way, we don't joke, you know. So at that time I was working with BUFORA, and I had a phone call from a Russian newspaper. I'll try and pronounce its name. It was called Izvestia. This was a national newspaper across the Soviet Union. They asked me what I thought about it, so I can't remember what I told them now, you know. I just passed a few comments. They then sent me a copy of the printed newspaper, and again, I couldn't read it. All I could see was my name, and I lived in a town then called Batley. Not far from here where I still live, but it was a town called Batley. Weeks later, I start to get letters from the Soviet Union. All it said was Philip Mantle, UFOs, Batley, England. No street number, no county, no nothing. And they kept coming and they kept coming. Most were in Russian, so I didn't have a clue. Then books were sent, again, most in Russian. But then I got a few letters in English from some of the Soviet UFO researchers. And this stuff just kept coming, Thiago. And I wrote back to the ones that I could read. And I thought, what am I going to do with all this? So, again, you know, we're talking really pre-internet days, but I knew Paul Stonehill in America. Paul was originally from the Ukraine, so he speaks, reads and writes Russian. He escaped the Soviet Union, I think, when he was about 13 or around that age. He helped others escape and was even on the KGB wanted list, you know. His real name's Pavel, but it's Paul Stonehill. He lives in California. So I contacted Paul and I said, look, mate, I've got all this stuff, but I can't read a word of it. Paul says, I've got everything, Philip. I said, well, you can't have everything. I've got all these letters from people. So he says, I'll tell you what. He says, box it all up and send it to me. He even gave me his own Federal Express account number to send it. So I sent this box of material to Paul, and his reply was, excuse my language, bloody hell, you know. And that's how it all started, Thiago. So obviously a lot of these people writing in were just members of the public, you know, telling us about what they'd seen and what have you. So Paul and I then, you know, formed a liaison to work together, and we have done and still are to this very day. And that's how it all started with the Voronezh case, which again I think had its anniversary just recently. I know I saw something about it, talking about it once again. There was even a UFO group set themselves up in Voronezh after that event, and I corresponded with them, and they sent me an alleged UFO photograph, which we had analysed at the time. And what I did with a colleague here, I had it analysed now to see if the computer analysis was any different. And it wasn't, it was exactly the same. So it was fascinating. And you know, we made contacts, and then of course the Iron Curtain came down, Soviet Union was no longer, so then the internet. So we still have colleagues and correspondents. We're gonna have most of it now goes via Paul, because it's just easier. Because he speaks the language, it just makes sense. It's like if I had something in Portuguese, what am I going to do? I'd send it to you, you know. It just makes sense. So, you know, we're thinking about writing some more about it. But Paul is also a workaholic. He works non-stop, you know, he has a family. So it's just the time more than anything. But that's, you know, again, had that not happened, or had TASS not released it, none of the Soviet stuff. I mean, one of our books, of course, is published in Russian. We have at least 2 more waiting in the wings to be published in Russian. It was only COVID-19 that put a halt to it, so they are translated and ready to go. I've done just in this last 12 months about 6 appearances on Russian television, a national station that I have no idea what
you are almost speaking Russian.
Well, yeah, with my accent, my Yorkshire accent, it's very much like Russian, isn't it? You know. So, and Russians, the company have been here in my house twice as well, filming interviews and doing other stuff. So yeah, and what we have to remember, Thiago, putting politics to one side, Russia is the biggest country in the world. There's still parts of Russia where nobody has ever been, literally. And it's a bit like Brazil. It's what I keep trying to say about Brazil. I said, if you want fantastic, detailed UFO cases, the place to go is Brazil. Because they have, I'm not saying that because I published your book or you're my friend and colleague. It is just a fact. You know, forget America, forget the UK. Russia is similar to that, although not the same, but it is similar. And but I said, if you go, people forget, I think, Thiago, how big Brazil is. And of course, most people think you speak Spanish like everybody else in South America, you know.
And the capital is Buenos Aires.
Yeah, well, yeah. So I said, you know, if you really want fascinating, detailed UFO stories like you will find nowhere else on Earth, Brazil is the place to go. And that is just, well, it's not a thing, it is just a fact. What we should be saying, well, why is that? Why do we get these type of things in Brazil that we don't find anywhere else? I don't know the answer to that, but it is just a fact. But, you know, it's followed closely, I think, by this, I still call it the Soviet Union sometimes, but by Russia. She's, you know, you've been here, you've lived in England. It's a tiny little place. And we forget how big these countries are. When I first went to America, I traveled from one side of the America to the other. Every time I got off the plane, I had to change the time on my watch, you know. But I think Russia has got something like 11 different time zones, you know. I was asked by an American podcaster recently to do an interview, and I said, okay, And he says, are you in the same time zone as London? I said, we only have one time zone here in the UK. It's not big enough to have anything else. But they were expecting it because I said I lived in the north of England. I might have a different time zone. I said, no. And I know when I was speaking at one of the conferences in America, I literally came out of the hotel and there was a river behind it. I went over the river and it was a different time zone.
Yeah, is that the way in US and in Russia? Yeah, they have a lot of times. But Phil, do you still believe there's cases of the former Soviet Union that is still kept in secret? Amazing cases.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, when the KGB files were released, they began because of an incident on the Russian-Chinese border with the military. An object was seen and all the communications went off. So it scared the Soviet military. Scared them to such an extent, they said that every member of the Soviet military must now be on the lookout for UFOs, and you must report them. Now, when you're talking every member of the Russian military at that point, I think we're talking, again, the late 80s, you're talking millions of people, Thiago, millions. And of course, the security forces then looked into civilian sightings and pilot sightings as well. And of course, they then were released by the Popovich, Marina Popovich and her husband, who were she was a fighter pilot, and her husband, I believe, had been a cosmonaut. And of course, we had them translated into English, and it was fascinating. But you realise you just have the inclination there's something missing, that it's not all there. Similarly, here in the UK, our Ministry of Defence will tell you that all of their UFO files have now been released to the National Archives. However, there is a slight problem with that, because the UFO reports used to go to a certain department within the MOD. They would hand them to another department who would decide what to do with them, most of which was just write back to them, tell them we're not interested. The other department was called Defence Intelligence 55. They have admitted that they looked into officially only a small handful of cases every year. Usually if they were made by military personnel or police officers or pilots, that kind of thing. Which is fine, you know, I've no problem with that. But where have they kept their files? Because all the files that we have are from the other department. So where are the files from? It comes under Defence Intelligence. And their department is called DI 55, which is Defence Intelligence 55. And the reason we know this is because the MOD commissioned an official UFO study, which was published in Classified in 2000, and it was called Project Condign. It was finally released under the Freedom of Information Act, I think about 3 years later, by Dr. David Clarke. He obtained it. What is interesting about that report is that the author of it is not on it. His name's not on it, but his name was found, and he was called Dr. Ron Hadow, and he was a long-standing military man who worked for the MOD. You know, he was a pilot. He'd had a long career with the Ministry of Defence. And he was one of those that did investigate UFOs for DI 55. And what is interesting is if you write to, it's closed now, but they got the nickname the UFO desk. It was called Secretariat Air Staff 2A. he would write to them and they'd say, all our files are in the National Archives. They're not lying. All of their files are, but not DI-55. For example, I interviewed a wing commander here in the UK some years back, Thiago, and he was, at the time, he had such a security clearance that when the US spy plane, the Blackbird, the U-2, flew into the UK for refueling, he was informed about it. That was the most secret aircraft in the world at the time. And he was at work in a radar station, and he says, Philip, I tracked 6 targets over mainland Britain, and I can give you a list of what they weren't, but I can't tell you what they were. I have no idea. He immediately checked with other radar stations, all of which had it on their equipment. He phoned the Ministry of Defence immediately, who said, make a report now. Not tomorrow, now. So he said, I made an official report, but you cannot find that anywhere in the MOD files. It's just not there. And there are other examples. If it was just one thing, Thiago, you could say, okay, it's got mislaid somewhere, it's got put somewhere. We had police constable Alan Godfrey, a well-known case. He had a missing, a UFO sighting and a missing time encounter in November, I believe it was, of 1980. While on patrol in his police car, he reported it when he got back to the police station, and eventually he was asked to write a report for the Ministry of Defence. There is no sign of it, nothing. It's not there. I then spoke to a lieutenant in the Air Force, again, different place. He was on duty one night. They tracked something on radar. Not only did they track it on radar, but 2 of the guards who were stood outside, they witnessed it visually. You can find the guards report in the MOD archives, but you can't find the lieutenants, their commanding officer. It's not there. So how many other cases are there like that we're not aware of, Thiago? So I think there's a little file somewhere that has these type of cases in it. I'm not saying it's been hidden for any secret reason. It may just be red tape and bureaucracy. It's been put to one side and forgotten about, whatever. It could be, but the point is there are cases that were reported to officials at the Ministry of Defence that are not in the archives. So you then have to ask, well, where the hell are they? The answer is we don't know.
Yeah, we have the same example here in Brazil. When my father was in A2, the intelligence of Brazilian Air Force, he showed me a box, a lot of cases, and I took note some of them, and I never found these cases that I copy by hand. I never found it in any Brazilian archives. Yeah. No, none of them. So, well, where are they? Well, you know that the government is still doing that. Yeah. My friend, still talking about this type of government, of covering information. There's a big debate about Nick Pope, where many, including you and Gary Hasentine and Nick Hedfern, claim that he's not who he claims to be with him, the MOD. What's your opinion about that? Is he lying, or just got bigger than he was?
Well, Nick claims 3 things. First and foremost, he did work for the Ministry of Defence for 21 years. That there is no doubt. I have to remember he has no academic qualifications either. This is important. So he has no degree, no PhD. So we call it higher education here. So once he's left high school, he's got nothing. I'm the same. I've got nothing. He claims that he ran the British government's UFO project. He ran it. That's his first claim. He then claimed that he investigated UFOs, crop circles, alien abductions, and other strange phenomena for the MOD. And he claims he was the Ministry of Defence's, the UK government's UFO expert. It's on the front of one of his books. Well, all three of those claims are not right. First and foremost, the British government's Ministry of Defence never had a UFO project. They had what was called the UFO desk. That was a nickname it got. What happened, Thiago, in the 1950s, there was a lot of sightings in America, you know, over Washington and so on. Here, Winston Churchill asked what was going on, and they formed what's called it was called the Flying Saucer Working Party. It wasn't in existence for very long, and they came to the same conclusions as the Americans. There's nothing to UFOs. But there was a postscript to it. However, we're still going to get reports of these things, so we better find somewhere where the report should go. Somebody has to be responsible for it. And it was originally with a department called DS8. So any UFO reports went to DS8, it didn't matter where they came, they went to DS8. As the decades progressed, DSA and other parts of the MOD were amalgamated. It became Air Secretariat Air Staff 2A. That was the department in which Nick Pope worked. Now, I'd spoken to his predecessors and those that worked in it after him. It was only during that, Nick was different, don't get me wrong, he was more helpful than anyone else, but there was no UFO project. It didn't exist. The only UFO report was done by DI-55, as we've just discussed, and it was called Project Condign. Nick's department were not involved in it. It was published after Nick had moved on. Just to give you an example, this report, the Condign report, was circulated within the MOD internally. Nick's department were not even on the mailing list, so they didn't get a copy of it. Nick has openly said that a lot of their other duties was dealing with Air Force matters, like low-flying complaints, you know, all this kind of thing. So he would get letters from mainly members of the public, and he would reply, he would respond, but not before he passed it to DI-55. There's a phrase here in what Nick says, as what if is official. Officially, they looked at these reports to see if they were of any defence significance. By that they mean to see if these were incursions by enemy aircraft, the Soviets, whoever. And of course, none of them ever were. Nick will tell you they had no budget. He never left his office, never did any field investigations. He'll tell you that. No, I never went anywhere. So but there was no UFO project. I saw him in a recent interview and they said, well, what was the project's name? And so it didn't have one. I said, that's a bit strange, isn't it? You know, the Americans had Project Sign, Project Gudge, Project Blue Book, you know, what's the latest one? AATIP, you know, ATIP or whatever they call it at the department. They've all got a name. I dare say in Brazil, if it might have had a name, I don't know. Next up, investigations. Well, he never did any because that was not their remit. Both his colleagues that preceded him and those that followed him said that is not true. It was not we didn't have the resources, nor were we briefed to do that kind of thing. We would just answer the letters. And as for being the UFO, the British government's UFO expert, well, it's just a joke. It's not true. So we've got documents from the MOD, bearing in mind when Nick was doing the job on what got the nickname the UFO desk, it was from 1991 to 1994. Never in 1,000 years did he think that all the documents that passed his desk would eventually end up in the National Archives for anyone to see. So we have letters in there replying to members of the public. For example, a chap called James Easton asking what Nick Pope's role. He claims to have ran this, that and the other, and they say no, he didn't run anything. When Nick began that job in 1991, remember this is the civil service, he was a D grade civil service employee. D grade is second from bottom. So when you start in the civil service, you start off at E grade. He was only one up from that. He was a junior. He calls himself, officially was called an executive officer, EO. But that was just a fancy title for a clerk. We have a copy of, somebody again wrote into the Ministry of Defence, said, well, I'd like to do this job. How do I apply for it? And they said, we advertise it internally. They said, well, what is it? So they sent him the specifications of what you would need to do this job. Guess what? It's clerical. It's a clerical job, nothing else. And so let's assume, right, for example, let's assume that our government, UK government, did indeed have a UFO project at the MOD. Would you make the head of it someone with no academic qualifications and he's a D grade junior employee, second from bottom? Would you really do that? Thirdly, when you look at some of the documents that Nick himself wrote, people have reported sightings to him, and he said, I'll give you the addresses of some of the civilian UFO groups. I think you should contact them. So if you're the head of the UFO project, are you really going to pass sightings on to the civilian UFO research groups? Somebody wrote in and asked him about abductions. He said, we rarely get any such things. Somebody asked him about crop circles. Bearing in mind, he claims to have investigated them. He said, we don't have any files on them. There's one letter where a person sent Nick a videotape. And Nick's reply is there. And he says, I don't know what this videotape shows. I'll ask a few of the other guys in the office. And that was it. Does that sound like somebody who's running the head of a government UFO project? Would it not be, I don't know what this video depicts, and we better have it analysed, or I don't know what it depicts, but I think it might be an aeroplane or whatever, and don't waste our time, politely. No, didn't have a clue, not a clue. So I'm afraid Nick Pope did not work on the UK government's UFO project, simply because there never was one. Two, his definition of investigating is sitting in his office and never leaving it. And three, he was never has been the UK government's UFO expert. It's as simple as that. And I don't ask anyone to believe us. Those documents are all there in the MOD archives, at the National Archives, for you to go and look for yourself. And I was one of those, I just took Nick at his word, because I knew he worked at the MOD. I knew if I wrote to him, he'd answer my letter about UFO. So just, let him go. I had him at our conference. It only came up about just over a year ago. A colleague of mine I was speaking to, and Nick Pope's name came up in the conversation. And he said, oh, don't tell me about Nick Pope. So what do you mean? And he started to tell me, and I said, you kidding me? No. So although I believe my colleague, I went and double checked for myself, because he said, check this file, check this file, check this file. Because all the files in the MOD archives have a code number, Thiago. And lo and behold, I'd already got these files. I'd downloaded them onto my computer. I never looked at them, and I started looking at them and I'm thinking, holy moly, oh dear. And so you make of it what you will, but he did not do the things he claims to have done. It really is that simple. And that's it, you know. And it all came, the way it all came about was my colleague, Dr. David Clark. David is a skeptic. Let's make no, but he knows a lot about the subject. Been involved for a long time. He was the man who persuaded the Ministry of Defence to release their files into the National Archives. He then became the National Archives official spokesman every time they did a release. And Nick Pope didn't like that. He thought he should be doing it, but that's another matter. And so in November of last year, David Clark was interviewed by podcaster Martin Willis. And they were talking along about Rendlesham, because it was the anniversary of Rendlesham and what have you. And Martin says, what's your thoughts on Nick Pope? It was a question that just came out of the blue. And David says, well, do you really want me to answer that? Martin said, yeah. Martin had no idea, like the rest of us, what was about to come. So David just said, here you go. And that kicked it all off. You know, that's where it came. David had been talking about this for years, but I hadn't taken any notice, neither had a lot of people. So, but he's not the man he claims to be, I'm afraid, Thiago.
Yeah, well, we are. I think we're still in the eye of the hurricane. There's a lot of things to come up. My friend, just to finish our interview, tell us about the Flying Disc Press. I know that you publish a lot of books. One of is my book, and the Pascagoula case, and a lot of interesting books, very good books. Tell us about this work that you do.
Yeah, well, you know, you've published books yourself. You know, I always had problems getting a publisher for my books. But, of course, technology changed. And I worked, in my latter years, I worked for the bank. But a colleague of mine by the name of John Hanson, who runs his own publishing outlet called Haunted Skies, he was trying to encourage me to get involved in the publishing side of things.
Just a parenthesis. Haunted Skies, it's amazing. I have the 11 or 12 books. I have all the books. It's amazing collection.
Highly recommended. So, because I've been involved for so long, Thiago, and done lots of different things, I knew people like yourself around the world. Well, a colleague of mine called Peter Cielebias from Poland sent me a book manuscript, not necessarily to be published. Peter was practicing his written English. And he wanted me to read it and see, you know, to say how well, you know, was it any good? And I read it and I thought, let's make a hell of a book. So what I planned to do was wait until I retired from work, then start Flying Disc Press. So in 2015, I jumped in with both feet, set up Flying Disc Press with an aim of trying to publish as many books as I could from different parts of the world. That the English-speaking part of the world probably never heard of the stuff that's in it because of the language barriers. So Peter's was the first one. You know, it was a fast learning curve, made a lot of mistakes. Followed it up then by Dr. Dan Farkas with UFOs over Romania. Peter's was UFOs over Poland. And we were up and running. I got then chance to take early retirement from the bank, which I did. And plunged all my efforts into writing, researching, and of course, publishing at Flying Disc Press. And, you know, I now have more books than I know what to do with. I keep having to turn people away because there's just me here. Then I linked up with Dario Fernandez in Argentina. He's the editor of FENÓMENO magazine there. And Darius has set up Flying Disc Press Latin America. So some of our books getting published in Spanish. And then I linked up with Jean Libero in France. And some of our books, including yours, are getting published in French. Thankfully, both gentlemen are very good at English as well. And of course, we've made contacts with other publishers, like we have a German publisher that's interested in all of our books, a Russian one that's interested in some of them, but you know, just the COVID pandemic has put everything on ice in that respect. So that's how it all began, you know, Thiago, and with more books to come. You mentioned Pascagoula, so the Close Encounter of Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson in Pascagoula, Mississippi in 1973. Published 2 books by Calvin. The first became a bestseller. Calvin has sold the movie rights. So there's a movie screenplay almost finished. We have a contract to do a documentary series about it. Again, it's only COVID that's preventing that.
Congratulations. It's just because of you. Congratulations.
Yeah. Well, we're also working on a graphic novel. That's about a third of the way done. Just yesterday, we had a beautiful model diorama made of the scene, which
I wanted.
So, but more importantly, since Calvin first went public, bearing in mind he kept himself, you know, behind closed doors for years, more and more people in that area have since come forward, Thiago. We talked right at the beginning about digging and digging and digging on a case. I've worked with a lady by the name of Dr. Irina Scott. So basically, I've been finding these witnesses, and Dr. Scott in America has been interviewing them on the telephone for me. Literally just arrived today. The following day of the encounter, both Calvin and Charlie were given an examination by a doctor called Dr. Bosco, where we found him. He's still alive. He's 91. His memory at parts is a bit hazy, but we've got an interview with him on the record, you know. And he was the guy that examined them at the hospital the day after. Another example is when they went into the sheriff's department to report it, the sheriff was a chap called Sheriff Fred Diamond. And he made a secret tape recording of the 2 gentlemen, thinking he'd catch them out. Well, Sheriff Diamond is deceased, but his son is still alive. And his son was a police officer. And it was his son that took that first telephone call that night from Charles Hickson to report the incident. And he's gone on the record and said, Philip, I must have taken over 50 calls that night of reports of UFOs. And when I went back to the police station, there were people there reporting it in person. And the so-called secret tape that was made, well, he has a copy of it, you know. So we even found him, and nobody's ever interviewed him before. So, plus other eyewitnesses from a couple of days before the event, Thiago, to a few days after, plus on the day itself. So it seems it built up, then there was the encounter, and then things sort of faded away again. There's peaks and troughs, and we've interviewed most of these witnesses. There's only 1 or 2 that have refused to be interviewed, and fascinating stuff. You know, people saw the things from the other side of the river from Calvin and Charlie at the same time, same night, same time.
Yeah, I dare to say that the Pascagoula incident, it's so important and interesting than Travis Walton case. And even more, there's more witnesses. They're more abducted. The Travis Walton was just one. Pascagoula will have 4, if I'm not wrong, 4 people were abducted. And I hope this book come to Brazil, to the Biblioteca UFO, HHV of Revista UFO magazine. We published some of your books in Russia, USOs are published here in Brazil, and I hope this book from the Pascagoula, about the Pascagoula case, be published in Portuguese in Brazil. It's a very interesting and amazing book.
It gets more fascinating as the days go by, Thiago. For example, Calvin said when these creatures came out of the UFO, he was terrified. And one got a hold of him, and he said he felt some kind of prick, and he instantly relaxed, wasn't scared anymore, and off they go. So the same thing happened when they're coming out of it. He was again terrified, felt some kind of prick, and then he relaxed. We found in the files of the Center for UFO Studies a 1-page type written document on the old typewriter, and it is called Puncture Wounds. And it tells of both men being given a physical examination and finding, in inverted commas, puncture wounds on both men. Now, are these the same puncture wounds that Calvin's talking about, where he felt this prick? Doesn't say whereabouts on the body they found them, just they found puncture wounds. I thought, I couldn't believe this. I could not believe it, you know. But it is there for everyone to study. You know, it is there. And Calvin had never seen it before. He'd never seen the document before. He had no idea it existed. And he just goes, well, I don't know. I can only tell you what I know. You know, we found out that Calvin had another encounter in 1993 and had gone under hypnosis with the late Bud Hopkins. So I got the tape. I managed to get a copy of the tape and transcribe it. Charles Hickson, back in the 1980s, went to see Bud Hopkins twice. I went under hypnosis. We have transcribed them, and they're in Calvin's second book. Just to round it all off, in September of 2019, Calvin was hypnotized again by Kathleen Marden, and again the whole transcript of that is in the book. So you know, more things just keep appearing as the days progress, Thiago. And it's like we said at the beginning, with any case, just keep at it and don't give in. Just keep digging, and it's amazing what you can turn up.
That's great. Well, Philip, I would like to thank you very much to be in this interview for me and all the Brazilian audience, and I'm pretty sure that they will love it. And also, I will leave all the links to buy your books, the books of the Flying Express, and your websites, everything on the description of the video. So Phil, thank you very much, my friend. Hope you get safe, and I hope I'll be in London soon so I can see your magic room full of stuffs that I love it.
That's been my pleasure, Thiago, and you take care, my friend.
Thank you, my friend. Pessoal, espero que vocês tenham gostado dessa entrevista. Philip Mantle aqui com vocês. Um abraço para todos e até mais.